Well, speaking about policing the lockdown, you did hear the president's speech, if you did, and everyone also spoke about it, SAN, earlier today. But now we do have Professor Tanibi Alemika, who is a criminologist. He joins us from our studios in Abuja. Good morning, Prof. Thank you for joining us. A senior advocate of Nigeria, a lawyer who spoke this morning about the requirements of the law, how it needed to have been followed before the president made that pronouncement. But as it is now, they wonder, how is the police going to enforce this kind of directive, especially when if anyone is arrested, there might be no laws with which they could be prosecuted. So what do you see playing out?
The controversy as to whether there is existing law that backs the lockdown, I think is an unnecessary one, because even if in chapter 4, where those rights were expressly stated, there is a provision both in that section and in the actually chapter 1, suggesting that those rights are subject to enforcing public safety or promoting public safety and public order. So they were not unlimited rights and freedom that cannot be, in some cases, when it is as important as this, cannot be moderated. So I think it's an unnecessary controversy. But I think the important thing is when we hear policing, the temptation is to think that we are dealing with the police alone. But basically, policing refers to activities undertaken by groups of people, including government agencies, to ensure public safety and public order. So many agencies are involved in policing the lockdown, from road safety corps to environmental sanitation groups to the police itself, and then, of course, various organizations that have capacity or mandate to regulate a number of issues, not just about movement, about marketplaces, about operations of transportation. All of these come together when talking about policing the lockdown. It is a wide concept requiring cooperation among different agencies. At some level, it's even applied to individuals, where you can encourage your, people your friends, to ensure that they stay home so that they do not go out in contravention of the public declaration of the president, or as may be done by state governors in many instances.
Well, Prof, there are those who speak about when they hear policing, different things go through their minds. The conduct, the character, the attitude, how they see the police conduct themselves, even in the face of what we're facing at the moment. Many have huge questions. So, but broadly speaking, do you think that for those who have a problem with the functions of the police force, does it have to do with the laws setting up the police? I know they talk about the Police Act, and they also talk about recently when they were reviewing police reforms, talking about police reforms. Does it have to do with that, or is it just about the rank and file, training of officers, and ensuring that even the laws that exist are properly executed?
Well, when we talk about the police, whether it's the law, maybe some of it has to do with the law. The law we have now, regulating the behavior of the police, as enacted far back in the early 1940s. But I think it has to do with orientation generally. What we do have is a situation where a lot of citizens do not want to obey the law, and the police also, from their perspective, believe that they have the right to enforce the law as brutally as possible, or to do so by extortion. So it is not just on the part of the police alone. I think a lot of the problem also on part of the citizens. A lot of us really, if you live in Abuja, you find that the traffic light is as if they are meant for decoration. How people will just go on irrespective of whether the light is on red or amber or the rest of it. So there is that problem in the society, problem of indiscipline. And so when you don't obey the law, you also don't respect any agencies that try to enforce the law. So the police, as we said also, have the attitude that they indeed must enforce the law by all means, by whatever means. They are justified because they have the power. But if you look at other agencies created outside of Nigeria Police Force, over time they also begin to have the similar attitude of using force, of using excessive force in applying the law. In Lagos, LASTMA are not that friendly. KI was already becoming a problem. So it is not just the police. I think it's an attitude that permeates the society and orientation. But for this COVID, I think basically is we must look wider, talking about policing, about the conduct of traffic management. I think they are very important. The road safety, the state law, transport and safety agencies, LASTMA in Lagos, for example, and then environmental protection agencies. These are very, very key to the current lockdown. And we must not just focus on the police. We must focus on what these are doing and how effectively they are doing their job, and of course, whether they are doing it within reasonable power that have been granted to them without exercising those powers in a very reckless manner.
So, Prof, specifically, the president said he's directing cessation of all movements in Lagos and the FCT and Ogun State for an initial period of 14 days. Specifically, how do you see this directive being implemented?
I don't want to be skeptical, and that's why I said we need to talk to one another. I'm not sure we have the kind of regulatory agencies, including the police itself, that can enforce that kind of total lockdown. Yesterday evening, I drove into some part, what they call satellite town in Abuja. I live in the provinces in Jos, and sometimes, the central Abuja tend to be a little bit intimidating for those of us from rural communities. So I drove into a rural community. It was like an area they call Orozo. It was as if nothing was happening about all the things we are saying in town. People were doing their business. They were as crowded as they are. I saw people, young people, jumping at each other and hugging one another. And I just said, God, is that the same thing, the same nation we are talking about? So we really need a lot of education so that people can become self-policed. And I think that is important. We can become self-policed, police ourselves, rather than rely on the government to do that. Of course, they will be able to police maybe some of the major highways, some of the more visible areas, but in the very dense communities, it requires a lot of local initiatives, religious groups, Christians, Muslims, association, to actually mount a lot of campaign, a lot of persuasion in those communities. That's why I say policing is not just about police, it's activities undertaken by diverse groups to ensure public safety, and public health is one aspect of public safety. So government, as government agencies, will have difficulty in enforcing them. They will be able to enforce it on major highways, but of course, a lot of the dangers are in the inner segment of communities where there wouldn't be law enforcement agencies to enforce movement.
Prof, let's try to, sneak this in just before we wrap up the conversation in about a minute or thereabouts. Now, the dynamics have changed with this announcement. So what threats, what emerging threats do you think Nigerians should look out for at this time?
Well, I think the picture we should look at, I don't want to call it emerging threat, but I guess the threat is already there, is that in the next few days, we are likely to be having very high numbers of confirmed cases, and that can create a lot of panic. Somebody needs to be explaining to Nigeria why that was, necessarily resulted in part from the capacity, as the director of the NCDC had said just before this, at the earlier part of this program. There will be, as we develop our capacities, we might be finding the cases jumping by dozens per day, and therefore there will be a lot of panic. So we need a lot of communication, strategic communication, to let people know why that is happening, so that they do not in any way panic and then cause further problems.
I know that some time ago in Lagos, I think when they had this trust fund, security trust fund to carry out the activities, is there any linkage between the Police Trust Fund Act and effective policing?
No. The Security Trust Fund in Lagos was an initiative of Lagos state government. I think under Fashola, immediately Fashola was sworn in as an executive governor of Lagos State, he brought up that initiative. I recall also he invited the former Inspector General of Police, Mr. Muslim Smith. I think they laid the background, and of course, the former Attorney General came to run the organization. So that was Lagos State initiative. The current Police Trust Fund mimic what we call TED Fund, the Tertiary Education Fund, where 2% of tax of profit of certain organizations are, taxed and then used to develop tertiary education. So this is also a taxation-based. Some corporate organizations will be paying, I think, 0.05 of their profit in order to generate a trust fund. So the trust fund is within the ambit of the federal government. It's supposed to have a board of trustees appointed by the president and to manage the fund. So it's more like of tertiary education trust fund rather than Lagos State Trust. But the purposes of the two are similar, basically to enhance the capacity of the police to do their job, police and other security agencies to do their job of maintaining law and order, and of course, actually peacekeeping more efficiently in a more democratic manner and in a more civilized atmosphere.
All right, we appreciate your coming on this morning. Atandi B. Alemika is a professor of criminology, University of Jos.